Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gait Geeks. Today we are going to be talking all about lateral wedges. Hey everyone, here Scott and Ivo back, the Gait Geeks. Today talking all about lateral wedges. Ivo, how are you?
I am good. And I was very happy to see this article because I use a lot of Valgus posts in my office for lots of things, mostly internal tibial torsion, but also to open up medial joint spaces. So this made me happy because I always wondered in the back of my mind, if I'm having somebody do this for a long period of time, am I actually doing them a disservice? And we know now for at least 3 years, we're good.
That's right. That's the quotations there, the air quotes is long period of time is 3 years, 36 months in this particular study. So, lateral wedges are something I use quite a bit for over my years working just with general orthopedic patients with medial knee pain. It was a great tool I used in my toolbox in which I can just throw a lateral wedge in there. I usually, really kept my lateral wedge to the rear foot and extending a little bit into the midfoot, into the forefoot, but predominantly, really concentrated on that lateral rear foot wedge. And trying to drive that foot, opening that medial knee gap. And I also too wondered what was happening to the lateral joint space over time, because we are in fact, robbing Peter to pay Paul. There's no change without consequences. So what is the consequence here of driving somebody in that direction? Well, again, we're going to be closing down the lateral space. But does it have a change in terms of the actual joint long term? The answer is no.
Yeah. So this is the article we were talking about out of Gait and Posture. It's 2017, so it's been a while since this one came out. Almost. Well, it's 8 years now, right?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, as far as that goes. But interesting, it's of course going to depend on other factors. So one, how much mobility do they have in the rear foot? In other words, how much calcaneal eversion is available to them? And then two, how much, I guess, midfoot pronation and forefoot pronation they have available to them. In other words, what's the motion of that first ray? The less motion we have the first ray, when we put this length, and they did this pretty much almost full length. It went from the heel all the way to the end of the med heads. If you're going to run a post that far, that's going to have some pretty hard and far-reaching effects. So if you have a forefoot varus that's somewhat rigid or an uncompensated forefoot varus, you're really going to push the leg over in that direction and really probably end up opening that medial joint space even more than if they had some flexibility or, they were able to compensate in that first ray as well.
They used a 7-degree post, which is a pretty substantial.
It's a honking post. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Definitely not for the faint of heart as far as that goes, but super nice. I think I've only used a 7-degree post on one patient I can think of that had severe medial joint OA, and it worked charms for her. It was really good. Of course, it depends upon their anatomy, right? So if you've got a person with external tibial torsion and we use this valgus post to open up that medial joint space, they're already going to be accelerating their pronation as they come through mid stance. Mm-hmm. That might push them over the edge and be too much. Whereas you have a person with internal tibial torsion and they're doing this, it could be the panacea and a really good thing for them, particularly as they start to come through mid stance and that knee needs to move from outside the sagittal plane to in the sagittal plane as they're moving forward.
And the shoe that you're putting it in is going to really matter as well. If you're putting them into if they're wearing a stability shoe with a dual density midsole and something that's really trying to limit pronation, and we stick this lateral wedge in there, what are we really doing here, right? So is that in fact going to stop the pronation and maybe allow more dissipation of force through the knee? I don't know. I think each person's going to be able to compensate slightly differently based on those situations. But the point I'm trying to make is you need to be aware of what kind of shoe you're putting that wedge into as well.
I think if it's a motion control shoe that they're in and you're using this wedge, then you're just kind of negating the effect of the motion control shoe.
I would tend to agree
as far as that goes. But, what are going to be the indications? Well, you either want to open up the medial joint space or you're trying to bring the knee to the midline. I mean, those are the indications. So you usually don't see that with people with genu valgus. You usually see that in people with genu varum or tibial varum, where we want to kind of open up that medial joint space somewhat more. But sometimes people have, unicompartmental DJD or I guess it would be just knee OA rather than calling it DJD. But same idea, where we're just trying to unload that. Sometimes a symptomatic, meniscal tear where they've got a small flap tear or something like that, and we're trying to unload some of that as they're coming through. It can be handy. But the nice thing is we're not affecting their ankles, we're not affecting their hips, at least according to this paper. And that's just kind of good to know.
Mm-hmm.
If people are progressively getting worse as you see them over the years, then that's not always a good thing. So,
and I would tend to say, like, for me, I always go less is more. So a 7-degree wedge is more than I would ever probably put into somebody's shoe. That being said, we know that amount of wedging did not create any problem long term, 3 years. So therefore, less posting is probably going to have less damaging likelihood, obviously. I feel very, very confident in continuing to use lateral wedges if I needed to with somebody with medial knee pain. And again, not have to worry about any type of long-term type of implications on what you're doing to the actual joint. The goal with this, again, for me in this patient population is pain relief, right? So if I can get pain relief with 2 or 3 degrees of a wedge, I'm going to do that, as opposed to having to go all the way up with 7 and really trying to over exceed maybe what that body can tolerate. So for me, less is more.
Yeah, and in this study, they used an orthotic that was valgus wedged. You could also just build a valgus wedge.
Correct.
You could take some, whatever you have in the office. We have a 3 and 5 and 7 millimeter thick 70 diameter EVA, and you can just build your own. There's companies that make prefabs that do this for the ski industry and biking industry, which are basically going to post those things in. So what are your indications? What do we want to do? And
they used a polypropylene type of orthotic shell, which is a fairly rigid type.
Yeah, it's beefy.
It is. And again, depends on how thick it is. There are different thicknesses of that polypro that you can use. And again, it depends. The thickness and the rigidity will depend on how heavy that particular person is. So a 1/8 or a 3/8 type of thickness polypropylene is going to act very differently on somebody that weighs 100 pounds versus somebody that weighs 250 pounds. So all of that needs to kind of be thought of as well. I might have used something more like an EVA, or probably something more like a maybe like a subortholine, which is a little bit more forgiving. I think it was a 70 durometer, which is it's
pretty beefy. Yeah, that's what we use for all of our lifts and everything in the office.
Yeah,
so.
Pretty beefy. So just something else to consider. Another variable. I think they wanted to try to minimize a lot of the other things. So they had the control group was in essence somebody with an orthotic without the post, and they used the same durometer type of material. So I can understand what they were trying to do and trying to limit all other variables as to how much an arch collapses. If they just lock everyone's foot in that neutral position, quote unquote, and just put the lateral wedge, what effect does it have? So I see kind of some of the methodology of the study, but that is probably more than I would normally think to use. And like Ivo said, I've done it before with just the sock liner. I've attached that lateral wedge to just the sock liner and created that same type of wedging and try to offload that medial side.
Yeah. Anyway, post away. Have a good time.
Thanks, everyone. Till next time.